Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BV-TV BizWyze Channel. Now, I was interviewing the CEO of a technology company the other day, and in our off-screen chat, he was lamenting about some of his meetings he'd been to recently, where everyone seemed to be trying to outdo each other with jargon and acronyms. He found the whole meeting hard to follow, he said. I then had to tell him that I found his website hard to follow, full of jargon, and in truth, I hadn't the foggiest idea what his business did. Heck, I have to tell it is, don't I? But don't you find in the world of business, we're getting and giving more and more of what my guest today calls pretentious language and bewildering jargon? My guest wrote the book, Business Blather, Stop Using Words That Sound Good But Say Nothing. Please meet Jerry McTigue. Welcome, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Malcolm. Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to be on your show.
I love the title Business Blather. You're talking to us in the northeast of England, where the world of Geordie, it's a dialect over here, and blather and all that comes out as, and Scotland uses it quite strongly. Where did you come up with blather from?
Well, it's sort of alliterative, of course, business blather, and it's exactly what's going on. There's a lot of blather, being thrown around out there, and I think we need to put a stop to it.
Yeah, hey, we've found a common word across the pond, haven't we? Because you're in New York and we're in the northeast of England. Jerry, I'm delighted you've kindly agreed to guest today on our BV-TV BizWyze channel, and so let's wise up on that business blather problem. In this BV-TV show, I'll be talking to Jerry in my usual three parts. First, I'll ask him, what are the most common business blather mistakes people make? And in part two, we'll move to talking about how a business should go about improving the clarity of its communication. And in part three, and ask him to think about, and this is an interesting concept, I think, as the world shrinks through technology, how can we avoid possible cultural offences and offensives which may occur from business blather? But before we start, Jerry, can you please give us a brief overview of who you are and what your book's about?
Okay, I was born and raised in New York City, which was very near Madison Avenue, which is the advertising industry. And I was always taken by the energy and the creativity. So I became an advertising copywriter and a marketing communications writer. And so I've written every kind of business communication imaginable times 1,000. And I see that so much opportunity is being squandered by businesses today who are sort of stuck in this corporate culture of, as you mentioned, pretentious language, bewildering jargon, annoying acronyms, a numbing wordiness that they just can't contain themselves. And what they're doing is they're not communicating. They're leaving their audience and they're just leaving them to figure it out for themselves. And this is really hurting. And so I figured I'd write this book called Business Blather and try to bring people's attention to what they're saying and why it's not good and how they can do it better.
I always remember being told off by somebody, quite rightly, at a marketing show. I talked about cognitive dissonance, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, fear." He said, "Well, why didn't you just say that?" Which is a comment, isn't it?
Yeah, we have a tendency to sort of swagger in our language, to always try to say something a little bit more sophisticated than it really is, or deserves, and that's how part of why we get stuck on this kind of corporate ease, so to speak.
Yeah, I did reply to him, by the way, that's what we do in marketing, so we can charge more. And he says, now I realize. Jerry, let's start our talk in part one. What are the most common business blather mistakes that people make? And in your mind, what are the ranges of impacts that such mistakes can cause?
Well, as I mentioned, pretentious language is basically talking over your subject, using words that fly over people's heads. And, it sounds good. The whole point of the book is, business blather sounds good. I mean, people listen to it and say, hey, that sounds pretty neat. I don't know what he said, but it sounds pretty neat. So pretentious language is one of the problems. Jargon, using insider lingo. Like a website will be sort of like a technical website, but they're trying to appeal to just common everyday people, and they don't realize that they can't use the same language that they use at work, that they have to talk to people in words that they can understand. So jargon. Then there are acronyms, initial abbreviations like SaaS, which is SaaS or software as a service. There's CMS. There's there are millions of them, and I find myself constantly Googling acronyms because I either don't know what they mean, or they could mean any number of things. Some acronyms have 2 or 3 meanings. So I'm constantly Googling them, and then when I come across it again a couple of weeks later, I've forgotten. So I have to go back and Google it again. So those are 3 things, the acronyms, the jargon, and the pretentious language. Then there's the wordiness. People feel that they're being paid by their client or their boss or whomever for their viewpoints and analysis. They think, well, the more I write, the more they think they're going to get, So they think there's value in that, when actually you're losing your audience with all this wordiness. So that's another problem, is going on and on about something. So I think the impact on business is, maybe 30%. Maybe you're communicating with 30% of the people, and you're losing a huge chunk of your audience. People's attention spans are very short these days.
Yeah.
The average visitor to a website spends 15 seconds. So if you don't inform them within 15 seconds, they're going to get impatient. They're going to leave. So you really have to be upfront, be concise, be clear. And within those bounds, you can still be creative. I mean, even more creative if you're concise and you're very punchy in your wording. So those are some of the problems.
Yeah, I tell you one thing I found as well. These acronyms you were talking about. You almost feel embarrassed to ask what they mean. Or in my case, I've got into trouble a couple of times because I thought LOL stands for lots of love. And so, many of the times I got that one wrong, but that's another story.
That's funny. Yeah. I can see where a person can get confused by what you said,
Yes. Yeah. Well, I get my face slapped easy. Listen, the other thing is that you've written the book. Are you going to have to constantly keep it updated because of this constant change?
Well, I use examples, and things do change, but the basic precepts of the book don't. I mean, the acronyms might change, but the warning not to use them or use them excessively, that doesn't change. The wordiness and the words used might change, but being wordy doesn't change. I mean, you can be too wordy, and no matter what you say. So I think the book is kind of timeless in that respect.
Yeah. We tend to judge also in the UK, according to a couple of newspapers. You either write for the Sun newspaper, which is small words, or the Daily Telegraph, which is a big broadsheet. And I think what people should do is write more for the Sun, because, as you say, most of your audience, 70% of your audience is what you're after, not the 30% that understand.
You're correct. And today people just don't have the time, with texting and being bombarded from all sides with communications. They don't have a lot of time. As I say, today's information consumers like their whiskey neat. There's no watered down meanderings, no going off point, lots of meat, easy on the potatoes, I say.
Well,
So,
as we're only 30 miles from the Scottish border here, I'll agree with you on the whiskey neat bit.
okay.
Jerry, it's time for part two. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind viewers and listeners of your URL, your website, which is all the W's, Jerry McTigue, and let me spell that out, jerrymctigue.com, by the way. So viewers, obviously you can see it on the screen behind me, but for listeners, let me spell that out for you. Jerry, that's Jerry, Jerry, and McTigue is spelled McTigue, jerrymctigue.com. Jerry, time for part two. Let's move to talking about how a business should go about improving the clarity of its communication. Should it be playbook style, a policing department, a regular customer survey? What do you think, and how should it be implemented?
Well, what I do in the book, Malcolm, is in the first part, what we just talked about, I talk about the generalities of what not to do. In the second part of the book, I go into specifics, and businesses can learn from each of these different types of communication. I talk about LinkedIn profiles, how to make them better, websites, emails, press releases, white papers, sales letters, social media ads. Social media ads are very big today, and I basically instruct people, what not to do, based on the part one things, and other things that they should do to avoid miscommunication or non-communication in a lot of cases. I give you an example, and this goes for both companies and individuals, are LinkedIn profiles. LinkedIn is probably the most underappreciated, underutilized weapon in the business arsenal. People don't realize whether you like it or not, and whether you know it or not, people are checking you out on LinkedIn. And if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, or if yours is the equivalent of answering the door in your pajamas, right, then you better do something about it, because people are looking you up. So I go into detail on what you should do, whether you're looking for a job, or whether you're a salesperson that you want to impress your clients and prospects. I tell you things that you can do to improve your LinkedIn profile, like the headline, to fully utilize the headline to get keywords in there. So someone looking for someone in your position, your name might pop up in a search. I tell you how to do your about section. The about section is basically the equivalent of a cover letter to a resume. And your about section should be creative. It should not be in chronological order. It should be your greatest hits right up there up front. Be a name dropper. I say, these are things you did. Get credit for them. So put the big names right up there. If you worked for a big account, or you worked for a famous company, or you had a famous client, put it right up there, because I call it the Harvard effect. If someone tells you right off they went to Harvard, or in your case, Oxford, right away, everything else they say has more weight because of that. So if you have a Harvard-like boast to make it up front, and then everything that follows will be colored in that way. So LinkedIn profiles are one example of what I cover in the book that you can improve greatly by just doing a few simple things.
That's great. I like that, and I'm working my way through the blather. By the way, I'm slowly trying to improve. I've got a policing department though, and the policing department is called my wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a police department too, so I share your whatever.
She will go through my words and saying, why are you using so many words, everything. And I keep telling her I'm in marketing. I'm a half full all the time. But she's right. That's why I was asking you, should a company have some form of check-in process within it? Otherwise, I find that so many people don't actually know that they're making these mistakes. They're not aware of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a fault maybe of their ad agency or maybe their PR agency, because if they're the spokespeople for the companies, if they put out the communications, they should be doing it correctly. And unfortunately, I mean, although a lot of agencies are really good, there are some that are not, and some that fall into the business blather category. And if you do everything in house, then you really do need a policeman. You need someone to monitor your communications, to point out where you're going off track, what you're saying that's not comprehensible, where you can make things shorter, more concise, higher impact. And that takes a third party. That takes another eye to see where you're going wrong and to tell you what you need to do to get back on track.
Yeah, and I'm watching a New York program at the moment called Damages, made many years ago with Glenn Close in the 2000s, and she's a New York lawyer, and her strategy is to get the defendant to talk, because she says the more you talk and the more his ego is pushed into it, then the more the mistakes will come in, and that's where we'll find the thing to hit him with. Are we communicating too much?
Yeah, well, obviously, because there's just so much of it, and people are just so inundated every day with communications of all sorts, from their phones, from their TVs, from all the screens that they have, and from live people, and billboards, and you can't avoid it. So if you want to cut through that clutter, you better say something powerful, quick, and it better be good, because it's just going to go right by people.
I read, by the way, that on average we get 9,000 marketing communications a day.
Oh my gosh.
And we forget easily 1 in 8 thing. We forget. I only remember 1 out of 8, but I can't even remember the 1 out of 8 or 8,000. Can you?
Yeah, and you watch TV and you see this great commercial that's funny, you laugh, and then after the commercial you say, that was really good, but I don't know what the product was.
Yes, yeah. We say, I don't know what the actual commercial was about. Never mind the product.
Yeah, I mean, it's either or, and so if I always say, if you're gonna make be funny, comical, or whatever, always involve the product in the humor. Yeah. Always involve it in the drama, so you come away knowing exactly what that thing was about.
Yeah, and I would add, cut out the vanity that's in so much communication.
Yeah. And speaking of vanity, that's why people use that kind of pretentious language, because they're trying to swagger. Yeah. They're trying to impress the person, the recipient of their information. They're trying to impress them with their knowledge and their sophistication. But what they're not realizing is, I'm not interested in your knowledge and sophistication. I'm interested in your product. Yeah. So you better tell me in no uncertain terms what it is, what it does, and how I can benefit from it. Very simple.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. Now for part 3. Now, there's something that struck me from the 500 plus interviews I've done in this last year, which is quite a lot around the world. But as the world shrinks through technology and we all reach out for new global markets, well, we have to in the UK because of Brexit, how can a business avoid possible cultural offences and offensives which may occur from using Business Blather? I mean, we are across the pond from you, but we're separated by a common language, aren't we? What's your thoughts here?
Well, I think if you're dealing globally, if you're dealing with other countries, I think you have to Google that country, Google their business customs and procedures, because they're different in other countries. Take, for instance, Japan. It's very rude to say no right off in Japan. If someone comes to you with a proposal, and you say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested, that's disrespecting them. So you have to be very careful. So I would suggest that you Google the country that you're dealing with and find out what their business customs are, and then abide by them. The other thing is, when you're communicating, whether by email or phone or whatever, be careful. Even though the other person on the other side speaks English, they may not know contractions. They may not know, lingo or slang or informalities and things like that. So it's always good to talk in very clear, plain English language, almost as if you were trying to speak in French. You would use the basic words without any kind of embellishment. So try doing that when communicating with someone from another country in English. And then, of course, be brief in your communications. Don't talk too fast, because people, listening to you might not get every word. So there are a lot of things you can do and should do if your bread and butter is global business. Then you better get it straight, because you might offend people, or you might lose the audience by not communicating clearly.
Oh, so okay. Let's just try that. You're a born and bred New Yorker. It's a tough city, isn't it? Because you have to spell it twice. But never mind. You're a tough New Yorker there. What do we need to understand so that we don't cause offence with our blather in New York if we're an Englishman in New York, as the song goes?
I would say just be patient. New Yorkers sometimes tend to be not too patient, although I don't think we're as bad as we're made out to be.
Right.
But there are some people who are very impatient, and they don't have patience with people who don't speak exactly like they do, who have a problem and need it sorted out before, so that they come to you for a solution. So I would say try to give people the benefit of the doubt, learn their customs. And if you live in New York City or a place like that, or London, be an ambassador. People who visit, be nice to them. If they ask for directions, be nice. Don't be curt and just walk by them, because you're promoting your own city, and you want people to go away back to their place with a nice impression of you and your country.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that, Sam. I love New York. Yeah. Okay. Jerry, some of us, and my discipline of marketing is no exception, are all too often delivering a lack of clarity in our communication. Now, whether it's because we want to appear clever with our use of acronyms, appear more important than we are, or through just plain ignorance, it's not doing the business itself or yourself or your customers any favor. Thank you, Jerry McTigue, for highlighting this, and thank you for a great and fascinating interview.
Well, thank you, Malcolm. I really enjoyed it.